Dopamine is a neurotransmitter, which is a chemical messenger that transmits signals between neurons, nerve cells, in the brain. It is often referred to as the feel-good neurotransmitter, as it is associated with feelings of pleasure, reward, and motivation. Understanding how dopamine works can help us understand why we enjoy certain activities, why we become addicted to certain substances, and how we can improve our motivation and productivity. What is dopamine? Dopamine is a neurotransmitter, which means it is a chemical messenger that transmits signals between neurons in the brain. Dopamine is involved in many functions, including movement, memory, attention, and learning. However, it is most well known for its role in the brain's reward system. When we experience something pleasurable, such as eating delicious food or winning a game, dopamine is released in the brain. This release of dopamine signals to the brain that the experience was rewarding, and motivates us to seek out similar experiences in the future. How does dopamine work? Dopamine works by binding to dopamine receptors on the surface of neurons in the brain. There are 5 types of dopamine receptors. When dopamine binds to its receptors, it activates a signaling pathway within the neuron. This signaling pathway can lead to changes in the neuron's activity and communication with other neurons, which can ultimately lead to changes in behavior. One of the key ways that dopamine influences behavior is by regulating the brain's reward system. The reward system is a complex network of neurons that are involved in motivation, pleasure, and reinforcement learning. When we engage in a behavior that is pleasurable, such as eating delicious food or engaging in a fun activity, dopamine is released in the brain. This dopamine release signals to the brain that the behavior was rewarding, and reinforces the behavior, making it more likely that we will engage in the behavior again in the future. However, dopamine is not solely responsible for pleasure and reward. Other neurotransmitters, such as serotonin and endorphins, also play important roles in the brain's reward system. The relationship between dopamine and addiction. Dopamine is closely linked to addiction, which is a chronic and often relapsing disorder characterized by compulsive drug-seeking behavior despite the negative consequences. When we use drugs, such as cocaine or heroin, dopamine is released in the brain. This release of dopamine signals to the brain that the drug is rewarding, and reinforces the behavior of drug use, making it more likely that we will use the drug again in the future. Over time, excessive drug use can lead to changes in the brain's reward system. The brain becomes less sensitive to dopamine, and individuals need to use more of the drug to achieve the same level of reward. This may lead to tolerance, dependence, and addiction. While dopamine is not solely responsible for addiction, it plays a key role in reinforcing drug-seeking behavior and in the development of addiction. The relationship between dopamine and motivation. Dopamine is also closely linked to motivation, which is the drive to engage in goal-directed behavior. When we engage in a behavior that is associated with a reward, such as completing a task or achieving a goal, dopamine is released in the brain. This release of dopamine signals to the brain that the behavior was rewarding, and reinforces the behavior, making it more likely that we will engage in the behavior again in the future. However, dopamine does not only reinforce behavior that is associated with an immediate reward. Dopamine can also reinforce behavior that is associated with a delayed reward, such as studying for an exam or working towards a long-term goal. This is because dopamine is involved in the brain's reward prediction system. When we engage in a behavior that is associated with a reward, dopamine is released in anticipation of the reward, even before we actually receive it. This release of dopamine helps to motivate us to engage in the behavior and work towards the reward. This is why dopamine is often referred to as the motivation molecule. It helps to drive us towards our goals and encourages us to engage in behaviors that are associated with reward. How can we increase dopamine? There are different ways of increasing dopamine levels in the brain. However, It is important to note that excessive dopamine release can lead to addiction and other negative consequences. Exercise. Exercise has been shown to increase dopamine levels in the brain, which may help to improve mood, motivation, and cognition. Eating. Eating foods that are rich in tyrosine, which is an amino acid that is used to make dopamine, can help to increase dopamine levels. Foods such as eggs, cheese, and soy products are good sources of tyrosine. Music. Listening to music has been shown to increase dopamine release in the brain, which may help to improve mood and motivation. Meditation. Meditation has been shown to increase dopamine release in the brain, which may help to improve mood and reduce stress. Social interaction. Social interaction has been shown to increase dopamine release in the brain, which may help to improve mood and motivation. Novelty. Experiencing something new and exciting can increase dopamine release in the brain, which may help to improve mood and motivation. Medications. Certain medications, such as dopamine agonists, can be used to increase dopamine levels in the brain. Low levels of dopamine have been linked to Parkinson's disease, a neurodegenerative disorder that affects movement and coordination. Treatments for Parkinson's disease often involve drugs that increase dopamine levels in the brain. However, an excess of dopamine can also have negative effects, leading to conditions such as schizophrenia, which is characterized by an overactive dopamine system. In conclusion, dopamine is a neurotransmitter that plays a crucial role in the brain's reward and pleasure centers. It is involved in many functions, including movement, memory, attention, and learning, but is most well known for its role in the brain's reward system. Dopamine is closely linked to addiction and motivation, and there are several ways to increase dopamine levels in the brain, including exercise, eating, music, meditation, social interaction, novelty, and medications. It is important to note that excessive dopamine release can lead to addiction and other negative consequences, so it is important to approach dopamine increasing activities in a balanced and healthy way.